Okay, so before creating our pivot table, we need to make sure of three things. Number one is that our data is in a tabular format. Number two is that we do not have any gaps in our data. And number three is that we format our data properly. In this video, we're going to speak about having our data in a tabular format. So you should actually have your column names at the top showing a distinct category. So each column showing a distinct category. So we have a column for our customers, another column for our products, region, sales amount, order date, and this is supposed to be the year, and this one is supposed to be the quarter. However, we do not have them labeled here because we want to demonstrate something. Okay, so let's try to create a pivot table here. I'm gonna click inside my data, press Ctrl and A on my keyboard to select all my data, even including the columns that are not labeled. And then I'm gonna click on the Insert tab on the ribbon, click on Pivot Table, and then I'm going to insert a pivot table in a new worksheet, click OK here. And as you can see here, a pivot table has been created, but our columns that are not labeled have not been included in the pivot table fields. So the columns that were not labeled were the quarter and the year. So this is why we need to make sure to label our columns. So if we go back to our data here and then create some labels for our columns, year and then quarter, and then create another pivot table, insert, so select all our data, insert pivot table, and then click OK here. And you can see here that the columns have been created because they do have labels. So the bottom line from this lesson is that you need to make sure to create labels for all your columns. And please note as well that in older Excel versions, instead of creating a pivot table without the unlabeled columns, you might actually get an error while creating a pivot table for columns that are not labeled. So always make sure to create labels for your columns before creating a pivot table. Okay, so the second rule for creating our pivot table is to not have any blank rows or blank columns in our data. So as you can see here on our data, we've got column F is blank, and we've got two blank rows here, row 18 and row 33. Okay, so let's try to create a pivot table here and see what happens. Now I'm gonna select my headers here. I'm gonna hold my shift key on my keyboard and then select the rest of the headers with my arrows on my keyboard, and then I'm gonna press Ctrl, Shift and down on my keyboard and keep doing that until I select all the data here. And then I'm gonna go to Insert, Pivot Table. I'm gonna try to create a new pivot table in a new worksheet, and as you can see here, I'm getting an error. The pivot table field name is not valid. This is because we have a blank column. So I'm going to click OK here. I'm going to click cancel, and I need to delete my blank column. So I right clicked on my column and deleted it. And now we need to also make sure not to have any blank rows in the middle of our data set. So imagine that you have lots of blank rows, not only two, but lots. So you don't want to select them all one by one in order to delete them. So a better way to do it is to select all your data set again here, press Control, Shift and down to select all your data set here on your keyboard, and then go to the Home tab on the ribbon, click on Find and Select, and click on Go to Special, and then we're going to select blanks. So this actually selects only the blank cells in our selection of cells. So we're going to click OK here, and as you can see here, only the blank cells have been selected. So I'm going to right click on the selected cells, on any of the selected cells, and then click on delete here to delete my cells. And I'm going to select entire row because I want to delete the entire row of cells that are blank. So I'm going to click OK here, and as you can see here, I managed to delete my blank rows. Okay, so now we can go ahead and press Ctrl and A to select our data. Make sure that we picked up all the rows here, and then go to Insert, Pivot Table, and insert a new pivot table. As you can see here, we managed to insert our pivot table, and this is another rule that you need to follow when creating a pivot table. Make sure that you do not have any blank rows in the middle of your data or blank columns. And when you have blank rows, either they could be missing values, you need to fill them, or if they are blank by error and you just need to remove them, then you remove them as we demonstrated. Okay, so the third step here for preparing your data for creating a pivot table out of it is to format each column properly. So you should check each column that contains a number or each column that contains a date and make sure that you format it properly. So for example, this is the sales amount here. This is not formatted properly because it's just numbers, so it's better to add a comma actually, and maybe if there is a currency, you could add a currency here, so English United States or English Canada or so. So you add a currency to it, and there are a couple zeros you can remove here using these arrows here for the decimal places. And then there is the order date column here. So Excel actually treats dates as numbers. So sometimes on the column containing your dates, you might see numbers. These numbers actually represent your dates, but they are not formatted properly. So if you need to format them properly, you need to select your column here and then go to this number format drop down menu and then select short date. So this formats your dates properly. And please note that on my PC here, I've got my dates formatted in the European way. So it's day, month, year. So on your PC, if you're in the US, you might have your dates formatted as month, day, year. Okay, so now that we've formatted our data properly, we can start creating our pivot table. So I'm going to press Ctrl and A on my keyboard here to select my data and then insert pivot table. And then I'm going to click OK to create a pivot table in a new worksheet. And that's it. So we've completed the final step here for preparing our data for creating a pivot table out of it. This step will help you troubleshoot any issues with your data in the future. So having proper format is a general best practice when preparing your data.